So picture this family dinner, everyone gathered around the table, and suddenly my brother calls me a lonely failure, and my parents laugh. Yeah, laugh. I mean, you know that sinking feeling when you realize the whole room is against you. But here's the thing, that moment wasn't the end. It was the spark. What happens next changes everything. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. This isn't just family drama, it's betrayal, strategy, and a showdown that flips the whole dynamic. It was one of those Sundays, the third of the month, which automatically meant a trip to my parents' house. And honestly, you could always count on the pot roast being dry always. I had just come off a 12-hour shift at the hospital, feet aching, scrubs clinging with that lingering sterile smell, and all I wanted was a quiet evening. But instead, I was stepping into a war zone disguised as family dinner. My parents, oblivious to my exhaustion, seemed ready to poke every old wound and watch the sparks fly. From the moment I walked in, the tension was tangible. Plates scraped against each other, forks clinked, and the usual forced small talk started. My mother, Helen, bright and chirpy as ever, immediately launched into gossip. We saw Diane Miller at the supermarket, Rosie, her daughter. You remember the one who was a year behind you. She's expecting her third, a boy this time. Isn't that wonderful, she beamed, as if announcing global news. I offered a tight smile. That's great. Mom, I said, my voice a notch flatter than intended. It's funny how people can spin such normal things into tiny darts of judgment without even realizing it. As I began stacking the plates, trying to keep my own head above water, I could hear my father, Mark, from his armchair, already half retired into his newspaper, trying to help. Of course, we told her you were busy with the hospital. I muttered a dry, almost automatic, I am busy, because what else could I say? We were launching a massive new oncology protocol. It was complicated, life-saving work, exhausting. And yet here I was, trying to smile through familial criticism that was somehow still dressed up as concern. And then there was Leo. Leo. My brother, 38, lounging in his chair, scrolling through his phone like a cat on a sunny windowsill. No work done, no thought for the effort it took to keep the world from collapsing around him. Freelance graphic designer and brand consultant, he claimed. A title that sounded impressive on the surface, but meant very little in reality. He waved my concerns away with a flick of his hand, dismissing my work. Right. Your protocols, he said, voice laced with that infuriating mix of pity and condescension. And here's the thing I had spent years studying, working, sacrificing, while he got to float along on charm alone. Leo wasn't done. He leaned back, stretched like a cat, and pat my shoulder pat, not a hug, not supportive, just heavy and patronizing. It's okay, Rosie. We can't all be creative successes like me. Someone has to do the boring stuff. I froze, feeling the weight of every eye on me, my parents watching with a mix of amusement and approval. And here's the punch. This wasn't a joke. They really believed it. Their laughter, soft and polite, was the match to a tinderbox of years of quiet resentment. I wanted nothing more than to slip away, to go home, put on a bath, and let the world fade. But I couldn't. Not tonight. Not with the words hanging there in the air like daggers. I don't find my job boring. Leo, I said finally, turning to face him, voice controlled but icy. He chuckled a soft, airy sound that grated on my last nerve. No, but it's not exactly a life, is it? All work, no play, still single. Huh. His smugness, the way he looked over at our parents with that self-satisfied smile, it was designed to wound. And it did, if only it wasn't for the quiet, simmering calculation building inside me. Failure, he said, and the word echoed across the dining room. My father chuckled, sharp and short, like he was trying to nudge the situation into a laugh. My mother, ever the enabler, tittered behind her hand. Oh, you too. And in that instant, years of steady, silent frustration, of financing his carefree lifestyle while being called a failure, all came rushing forward. Exhaustion melted into clarity, cold, crystalline, and precise. I smiled, a tight, careful smile. The kind you use when you're delivering critical news that you know will change everything. A failure, I repeated quietly. Funny coming from a guy whose rent I've paid for the last 3 years. The room went still. Every face froze. Leo's color drained. My parents' smiles vanished. The power had shifted in an instant, and it was deliciously slow. My mother's voice, sharp and warning, barely cut through. Rosie. I held my brother's gaze, watching panic rise in his eyes, what he stammered, suddenly vulnerable. What are you? But I didn't need to elaborate. The reality of the situation, built up over years, had been distilled into a single, clean, unarguable statement. I had been paying for his life, the luxury trips, the supposedly creative work, all of it. And now, the truth was out, and the silence, thick and suffocating, was proof of the imbalance finally exposed. As I turned away toward the kitchen, shoulders slumped but head high, I felt a strange sense of liberation. All the dinners endured, the subtle jabs and condescending comments, the forced comparisons to other families and cousins, it had all been a preparation. My parents' amusement, their misjudgment, even their laughter at my expense, it was a backdrop for this revelation. And Leo? Well, he had no idea the storm he'd triggered. Not yet. I took a deep breath and sank into the mundane, the act of stacking plates. But every scrape, every clink against the counter was underscored by a quiet satisfaction. The years of patience, the meticulous work, the endless hours of keeping both my career and our family afloat had culminated in this small, precise act of exposure. Leo's carefree existence, my parents' soothed approval, the false narratives they had built, they all began to crumble in that quiet, charged silence. By the time I finished, my mind was already racing, planning, calculating, thinking 3 steps ahead. This wasn't just about a dinner, a snide remark, or even the insult of being called a failure. It was about accountability, justice, and finally, clarity. And there's this odd thing about moments like that. They start quietly, almost imperceptibly, then expand, stretching the room, the air, until nothing can contain them. You feel the shift in gravity, the realignment of roles, and it's kind of breathtaking. As I looked at each face around the table, the realization hit me for years. I had played the role assigned to me, the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who worked hard, sacrificed, and quietly built a life while Leo floated by on charm and minimal effort. And all the while, the family narrative had been clear. Rosie works, Leo lives, Rosie sacrifices, Leo dreams. But tonight, in the midst of a dry pot roast and polite social pleasantries, that story was being rewritten. And that shift, subtle yet unstoppable, was intoxicating. You could almost see it in their faces, the flicker of doubt, the crack in their amusement. For the first time, they were witnessing the consequences of their favoritism, the unearned indulgence of Leo's lifestyle, and the sheer weight of years of unpaid labor, oversight, and silent endurance from me. It's amazing, really, how long a person can live in a world that mislabels them, and how quickly that world can tilt when the truth is finally, undeniably stated. The tension didn't immediately dissolve. It lingered, a heavy, unspoken thing in the room, but I wasn't afraid anymore. The exhaustion, the stress from the hospital, the constant balancing act, it had been replaced by a calculated calm. The kind of calm that comes from knowing your worth, knowing the depth of what you've managed, and realizing that for once, everyone else was going to see it too. And, well, seeing it. They didn't like it one bit. That night, as I left the table, the usual small talk and family chatter fading behind me, I carried more than the satisfaction of a revealed truth. I carried the seed of change, the promise of accountability, and the first taste of power after years of being underestimated. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the scales had begun to shift, and I could feel it. Every step I took away from that dry pot roast and judgmental eyes, that was the moment the game had changed. And, oh, it was just the beginning. The words had been hanging in the air for a moment, heavy and sharp. When I finally let them sink in, I looked at Leo, at that smug, self-satisfied face, and for the first time in years, I felt a quiet satisfaction. "Funny," I said, voice steady and deliberate, coming from a guy whose rent I've been paying for the last 3 years. The room froze. It was the kind of silence that stretches and twists, wrapping itself around every person at the table. Leo's eyes widened. The lazy confidence drained from his expression in an instant. He opened his mouth, then closed it, as if trying to swallow the words that might undo him. I could see the panic rising. The sudden recognition that the safety net he had assumed would always be there had quietly disappeared. My parents. Helen's hand flew to her mouth, a half-choked gasp, her eyes wide as if the air itself had shifted. Mark's newspaper fell to the floor with a soft thud, and he straightened in his chair, his face frozen in a mixture of shock and disbelief. The laughter that had punctuated Leo's insults seconds before evaporated like mist, leaving only the echo of the truth I'd just laid bare. It was surreal, watching them process, each tick of their facial expressions a record of dawning horror. I kept my voice calm, controlled, precise, the way I always did at the hospital when I had to deliver information that could not be disputed. "The loft," I continued, almost conversationally. "Your creative space, $2,400 a month, for 36 months. That adds up to $86,400. I could see Leo blanch, a flush of color rising in his cheeks, then fading to white. His eyes darted from me to our parents, as if searching for an escape route, a familiar ally, someone who would rescue him from the truth. But there was none. The illusion had shattered. Helen let out a small, sharp sound, part gasp, part sob. "Rosie," she began, but the words faltered. She seemed suddenly aware, maybe for the first time, that her laughter, her enabling, her blind support of Leo had placed her own child in the position of carrying someone else's life while being mocked for it. Her eyes, usually so bright with misdirected pride, now shimmered with something like shame. Mark, ever the historian, leaned forward, scanning my face with a look that was equal parts astonishment and analytical curiosity. For him, it wasn't just the shock of the sum, the revelation of 3 years of unpaid dues he hadn't realized I was covering. No, it was the meticulous way I had presented it, the precision in my words, the undeniable clarity of the facts. Historians love primary sources, and in that moment, I had become the living document of truth. Leo's mouth opened again, but no words came out. His phone, the shield he had used all evening, now lay useless on the table, ignored. The protective bubble of charm, the casual dismissals, the effortless charisma that had carried him through life, it was all gone. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to argue or shout. The numbers, the dates, the reality of my actions were enough. I shifted slightly, letting the quiet stretch, letting the weight of what I'd said settle into the room like sediment. And by the way, I added casually, almost as if we were discussing something mundane like the weather. Not anymore. The statement was simple, almost throwaway, but it carried the full force of years of patience, calculation, and finally, refusal. My parents' faces, already etched with shock, now carried the tension of realization. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't defending him. They were trying to understand the sudden reversal of control. Leo's hands shook slightly, the only outward sign of his inner chaos. His voice, when it came, was small, hesitant, and entirely unconvincing. What are you? His sentences stumbled over themselves, collapsing under the weight of the truth I had laid bare. The years of free living, the Bali trips, the supposed brand consultancy, all seemed to evaporate in the silence. He looked to our parents, desperate for an ally, a saving word, anything to preserve his carefully constructed world. But our parents' gazes were fixed, stunned and uncertain. The smiles had vanished. The indulgent laughter was replaced with an unspoken question. How had we not seen this before? I could almost see the cognitive dissonance building, layer by layer. The realization that his so-called success was entirely funded, that his creative lifestyle had been propped up by me while he demeaned me, was like a cold wind sweeping through the room. There was no arguing with numbers. There was no charm that could smooth over 36 months of financial truth. It was clear, it was precise, and it was undeniable. And then, as if on cue, the slow shift began. Leo's smug posture crumbled. He sank slightly in his chair, not entirely defeated, but the confidence that had defined him for decades was chipped, fractured. He looked smaller, exposed. My parents' expression softened into something like recognition, something uncomfortably close to shame. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But it was there, a first acknowledgement that perhaps they had been complicit. Perhaps they had let him walk over me for too long. I didn't need to say more. The room had already absorbed the message. The dynamics had shifted. For once, I was not just the responsible one, the silent worker, the person keeping everyone else afloat. For once, the power was mine, and I could feel it. Even in the small gestures, the hesitation in Leo's gaze, the faltering in my mother's posture, the slight leaning forward of my father, studying the implications, cataloging the facts like a historian confronted with undeniable evidence. It was a quiet, precise moment of victory. No shouting, no tears, just the perfect alignment of truth and timing. And in that stillness, I understood something profound. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anger. It was about clarity, about finally being seen for what I had done and for what I had endured, and maybe, just maybe, about changing the entire story of our family dynamic for good. The morning after that dinner, the house was quiet, almost eerily so. No calls, no messages. Just the distant hum of the city waking up outside my window. I made myself a strong black coffee, the steam curling in the cool pre-dawn air, and sat down at my kitchen table. For a moment, I allowed myself a deep breath, the kind that lets the adrenaline fade just enough to think. My mind had already shifted gears. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was data. This was analysis. And if I was going to make sense of it all, I had to treat it like the precise work I did every day at the hospital. At St. Jude's, my job was precision, attention to detail, and anticipating errors before they became disasters. Dosages, protocols, drug interactions. I cross-referenced everything, verified every variable, and documented every step. And now, oddly, those same skills applied here. I pulled the manila folder from my filing cabinet, the one with the copy of Leo's lease tucked neatly inside. I had kept it there, along with a few other documents, more out of habit than foresight. But suddenly, it felt like the key. I opened the lease and ran my eyes down the pages, noting the dates, the monthly payments, and the exact amount I had been transferring without fail. 36 months, 36 separate $2,400 payments. That added up to $86,400. It was a staggering number to think about, and it wasn't just the money. It was the pattern, the regularity, the blind trust I'd been operating under every month. I had signed off on this silent transaction, keeping the illusion alive, allowing myself to believe that it was temporary, that one day it would end, that one day Leo would stand on his own. But he hadn't, and neither had our parents stopped enabling him. 3 years of careful, relentless effort from me had supported his entire lifestyle, and now I could see it clearly. I pulled up my online banking portal and set the transaction history to the last 36 months. Line by line, month by month, the numbers confirmed what I already knew. $2,400, $2,400, $2,400, an unbroken chain of support. But then I started digging deeper, looking at the details beyond the rent, utility fees, parking charges, amenity payments. There were inconsistencies. March, late fee applied, $75. April, late fee, $75. May, final notice, $150, even with me paying his rent every month. Leo had managed to fall behind on everything else. I could almost picture the excuses he had given me, the flimsy rationalizations that had always sounded plausible in the moment. But in black and white, it was undeniable. My $2,400 a month hadn't helped him get on his feet. It had been a stable foundation that allowed recklessness to flourish, and the lease was only the beginning. I turned my attention to his so-called business, Leo Creative, the sleek, minimalist website with graphics, logos, and impressive client lists. At first glance, it looked legitimate, professional, sophisticated, but I was trained to look beyond appearances. Right-click, search image with Google, and my stomach sank. The logos, the so-called client work, were stock images, templates, purchased graphics masquerading as creative brilliance. Every carefully curated post, every mock-up and presentation, it was all smoke and mirrors. He hadn't been building a portfolio. He had been building an illusion. The irony hit me in a slow, cold rush. Leo, the dreamer, the creative one, had been living on the back of my discipline, my reliability, my ability to manage catastrophic risk in real time. And my parents, they had been his first-round investors without ever writing a check. They had seen his failures as pivots, his laziness as ideation, and I had let it happen. For years, I had convinced myself that family harmony mattered more than confronting the truth. But now, the illusion was cracking, and I could see the whole structure for what it was: fragile, dishonest, and utterly dependent on me. I spent the day at the hospital in a state of hyper-focus, dispensing medications, consulting with doctors, training residents. To anyone else, I appeared as calm and collected as always, perhaps even more so. But in the back of my mind, I was assembling a meticulous dossier, connecting the dots, building a narrative of accountability. Every missed payment, every stock image, every late fee, every post of Bali and Aspen vacations, they were all pieces of the puzzle. I was no longer just a sister or a daughter. I was an investigator, methodically cataloging evidence, tracing the threads of a deception that had been carefully woven around me. By evening, I didn't turn on the TV or run a bath. I opened my laptop, pulled the folder from the cabinet, and began to create a new digital file, a repository for everything I had gathered: screenshots of bank statements, utility bills, text messages from my parents pleading for me to continue supporting him, every piece of evidence that demonstrated the scope of his dependency. I labeled the folder simply receipts. Simple, clean, precise. The way I approached this was the same way I approached life-saving protocols, one step at a time. One thread pulled until the whole pattern revealed itself, and then came Amber, the unknown element. A text from an unfamiliar number, introducing herself as Leo's girlfriend. She chastised me, warned me against jealousy, called me overreactive, and completely failed to see the truth. Amber hadn't been part of this arrangement for years, yet she was arrogantly confident that she could judge me. That was the final spark. Her ignorance crystallized the entire situation in my mind. The audacity, the lies, the trips, the vacations, the life of Azure funded entirely by my labor and oversight had been exposed to someone completely oblivious. And yet, she dared call me jealous. That, I decided, was the final drop. It made the cold, deliberate calculation I had been building over hours into a surge of purpose. It was time to act. Over the next 3 nights, I lived a double life by day. Rosie, the head pharmacist, meticulously checking dosages, managing inventory, keeping patients alive. By night, Rosie, the forensic accountant, the investigator, the strategist. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Leo's so-called brilliance was nothing more than borrowed time and borrowed money. Every excuse, every story, every claim of struggle crumbled under the weight of the evidence I assembled. He thought he had leverage because I had co-signed the lease. He thought he had me trapped. But he had forgotten one crucial thing. I know how to read contracts. I know how to find patterns. I know how to anticipate outcomes. I am a pharmacist. I manage risk for a living. And he was about to be tested. Tuesday evening, I made a call to the property management company for his building. Calm, professional, polite. I requested a copy of the last 12 months of statements, citing routine record keeping. 5 minutes later, a PDF landed in my inbox. The rent paid on time, as expected, but the utilities, parking, amenity fees, late, repeated, escalating. The picture was complete. My $2,400 had been swallowed by the infrastructure of his irresponsibility, his illusion of success. Next came the business, Leo Creative. I cross-referenced every logo, every claimed client, every graphic on his site, stock images, template work, nothing real. And through social media, I traced Amber and Leo's trips New York, Aspen, Santorini, all coinciding with my 12-hour hospital shifts, all clearly vacations, not work-related networking. The connections were undeniable. I screenshot, I printed, I organized, I summarized. Each piece of evidence was a calculated step, a precise move on a chessboard. I was no longer reacting emotionally. I was building a case. And then I reflected. The Christmas 4 years ago when I mentioned my down payment for my condo and got a distracted nod from my father, the same evening, Leo arrives late, spins a story about a client emergency, and holds court about a dog toy subscription box while my parents hang on his every word. Every moment of enabling, every time my parents prioritized vision over reality, had set the stage for this. My sacrifice, my work, my discipline they had been taken for granted, dismissed as boring, and I had let them. But not anymore. Each text, each payment, each misrepresentation was carefully documented. I was transforming years of passive endurance into cold, methodical evidence. I realized the scope of what had been enabled: a 36-month, $86,400 string of dependency, a fabricated career, a life built on my reliability and their blind trust. And with each document, each ledger, each screenshot, my resolve solidified. I was no longer the quiet, compliant sister. I was the one who knew the facts, the one who could enforce them, and the one who would act with precision. The suspense wasn't about whether I would do it, it was about how methodically I would dismantle the illusion, exposing every layer of deception and reclaiming the balance that had long been tipped against me. Sunday arrived, and I walked into my parents' house feeling completely different than I had that first dinner. There was none of the usual anxiety twisting in my stomach, none of the dread that usually came with these monthly visits. Instead, there was a calm, focused energy, like the kind you feel right before you deliver a critical procedure in the hospital. I carried my large work tote, and inside was the black binder I had been meticulously preparing for days. Each page contained evidence, perfectly organized, labeled, color-coded even. Everything laid out so that there could be no confusion, no argument. This wasn't a confrontation born of anger. This was strategy. The living room was predictably staged. Helen sat on the sofa, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, as if preparing for an emotional performance. Mark stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, trying to radiate authority and seriousness, though the slight twitch in his jaw betrayed that he had no idea what I was about to unleash. And Leo, well, he sat perched on the edge of the armchair, trying to look wounded, as if he had been unfairly accused of something minor, rather than about to have his entire world exposed. He looked like a man about to accept an award, not a man who had been living a lie entirely funded by his sister. I took a seat in the single chair opposite them. It was small, functional, the perfect executioner's chair, if you will. I placed my tote bag on the floor beside me, and then, deliberately, I set the black binder down on the coffee table between us. The thud it made was the loudest sound in the room. It wasn't a slam, it wasn't violent, but it was noticeable. Every eye shifted, and I could feel the tension like a tangible force. "Rosie, you're late," my father said. His voice clipped, sharp, trying to assert control. My shift ran over. I replied, perfectly calm, as if we were discussing a routine scheduling issue at the hospital. I glanced at them briefly, the binder between us, and said, "You wanted to talk?" Helen's hand flew toward the tissue again, dabbing furiously at her dry eyes. "Oh, Rosie, how could you, in front of everyone, to say such a private thing about your brother? My goodness, we've barely gotten him to eat all week, and you humiliate him like this?" Her voice shook, and I noticed the subtle falter in her tone, the panic she was trying to mask with outrage. I didn't answer her immediately. I looked at Leo. His posture, previously exaggerated with wounded indignation, seemed to shrink under my calm gaze. He was pale, a little ashen, and his hands fidgeted on his knees. "I'm devastated. Rosie," he said quietly, almost as if whispering it to himself. And honestly, I had to admit, that line nearly blindsided me. It wasn't anger, it was genuine disbelief that someone could finally see through him. "I supported your rent. Leo," I said, voice even and deliberate, "I believe in accuracy, clarity, and accountability. Belief in your so-called work is a different category entirely." "What do you mean?" Helen interjected, looking from me to him, still clutching her tissue. She was clearly attempting to frame the narrative so that I was the villain again, but I could see through it. Her face, once warm and reassuring, was lined with confusion and, faintly, a dawning realization of complicity. I opened the binder slowly, deliberately, so that everyone could see. The pages were neat, organized, color-coded, and labeled. I began with the spreadsheet, $86,400 in rent payments I had made over the last 3 years, detailed month by month. I pointed to each column, my hand resting lightly on the paper. "This," I said, almost conversationally, "is the total amount I have paid for your loft, utilities, and associated fees. 36 months, $2,400 a month. The dates are accurate, verified, documented. Leo's jaw went slack. He stared at the spreadsheet like it was written in a language he couldn't read. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The mask of casual artistry and charm had dissolved. His usual easy smile, the posture that had carried him through life with minimal effort, vanished entirely. I flipped the page to his website. Sleek, minimalist, modern, professional. Yes, but every logo, every client example, every design mock-up, it was a stock template. I tapped on a logo and then tapped on the reference image from a $50 design template website. See this? I said softly. This is your so-called portfolio, copied, pasted, unaltered. These aren't clients. These aren't projects. They're templates. Mark leaned in, his historian's curiosity evident. He scanned the pages carefully, reading the labels and cross-references. Even he couldn't argue with what he was seeing. For him, primary sources are everything, and I had become a walking, talking source of undeniable evidence. Helen gasped, glancing at Leo, her eyes pleading with him to explain, to deny it, to somehow salvage the story they had been living in for years. But Leo couldn't. He simply stared at the binder, pale and trembling. I moved on to the building management records. I highlighted months where utilities were late, fees had accrued, and notices had been sent. I traced them meticulously. Even with my $2,400 monthly transfers, you were still delinquent 6 times this past year. This wasn't about helping you get on your feet. This was a safety net that allowed recklessness consistently. The air in the room thickened. Helen's breath hitched, her fingers tightening around the tissue. Mark's jaw clenched. Leo's face was a pale mask, eyes wide. I could almost see the internal calculations running in their minds. How could we have let this happen? How had this been ignored? And yet, here it was, impossible to deny. Finally, I turned to the social media dossier. Amberluck's travels, public posts, photos of Leo in Santorini, Aspen, New York, all during times when I had been working double shifts at the hospital. My hands moved methodically, placing each printout in front of them, date stamped, verified against my records. The pattern was unmistakable. The trips, the luxury, the apparent network opportunities, all of it funded by me, all of it leisure masquerading as work. New York in February, I said casually, tapping a photo of him at a rooftop bar, cocktail in hand. Aspen in March, Santorini later that spring, all coinciding with my shifts, my work, and yet you've claimed you needed these networking trips to advance your career. Helen's voice cracked. You said you were selling your old car to cover a server upgrade. Yes, I said, quietly, almost conversationally. But the data doesn't support that. The payments were my transfers, your utilities were late, and the portfolio was fabricated. This isn't interpretation. This is documentation. The room was silent, except for the occasional shuffle of paper, the soft intake of breath, the almost imperceptible click of a page turning. The tension was thick, palpable. I had dismantled the illusion, piece by piece, in a way that was precise, calm, and undeniable. No shouting, no theatrics. Just the facts, presented cleanly and methodically. Leo tried to regain composure. He opened his mouth, attempting a laugh, a shrug, some casual deflection. It's just a placeholder. Everyone uses templates. You don't understand the industry. But his voice faltered, quivered. The calm, collected argument I had constructed was too overwhelming. His usual defenses crumbled under the weight of methodical evidence. I didn't rush, didn't gloat. I flipped each page deliberately, showing every cross-reference, every payment, every post, every date. I could see the tension rising, the weight of realization settling on them all. I was not just presenting evidence, I was rewriting the narrative of our family, exposing patterns that had been ignored or rationalized for years, and doing it with the clarity of someone trained to see the details others missed. Finally, I closed the binder, the sound of the cover thudding softly against the table. I looked around. Leo sat, defeated, pale, shoulders slumped. My parents stared at the pages, the truth inescapable. And in that moment, there was no arguing, no charm, no pleading, no laughter, just the quiet acknowledgement that the balance of power had shifted. For the first time in decades, I was not the family's silent, responsible one being dismissed. I was the orchestrator of clarity, the keeper of facts, and the executor of truth. The room held its breath. Even now, I can remember the quiet, tense energy that seemed to fill every corner. It wasn't joy, exactly. It wasn't relief. It was the precise satisfaction of strategy executed perfectly. I had taken years of quiet labor, meticulous care, and methodical patience, and distilled it into one unassailable presentation. Leo's world, built on charm and borrowed trust, was unraveling. And the best part, I didn't need to shout, scream, or plead. The evidence spoke for itself, and everyone in that room had no choice but to see it. The confrontation had left a silence in the house that was almost deafening, but it didn't last long. Almost immediately, the real work began not for me, but for Leo. The eviction process was set in motion with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I contacted the property management company, confirmed the lease violations, and requested an official inspection. When the report came back, it confirmed everything I had suspected: unauthorized storage, an extra parking space being subleased, and evidence that Amber had been living in the unit without permission. Each violation was clear and undeniable, and it left Leo with no wiggle room. The eviction notice was served, clean, official, and final. No arguing, no negotiation, just facts applied with exacting procedure. At the same time, the phone began to ring constantly. Leo was calling nonstop, his voice oscillating between panic and fury. "Rosie, you can't do this. I'll get a lawyer. You can't ruin my life." I let the first few calls go to voicemail, each message a mixture of rage, disbelief, and desperation. His threats were dramatic, but they held no weight. There was no legal leverage he could wield, no loophole to exploit. He had miscalculated. He thought his charm and our parents' history of enabling would protect him. But the ground had shifted. I responded only when absolutely necessary, always calm, precise, and unwavering. Boundaries were set, clearly articulated. The free ride was over. There would be no more payments, no more indulgence, no more enabling. My parents' reactions were slower to adjust, but just as critical. Mark's voice over the phone was cautious, almost tentative. "Rosie, your mother is upset. She's been crying nonstop." There was a sense of guilt there, a recognition that things had gone far too long unchecked. Helen's voice trembled, pleading, attempting to frame the situation as if it could be smoothed over. "Rosie, please, just give him another chance. We miss him. We need to help him." But I was firm. The rules were non-negotiable. I listened, acknowledged, but did not waver. My boundaries were absolute: no more paying his rent, no more covering for mistakes, no more protecting his fantasy of success. It was my responsibility to act decisively now. and I did. Leo escalated in intensity. Calls turned into desperate voicemail messages, each one a mix of threats and manipulation. He claimed betrayal, accused me of jealousy, even invoked lawyers. I allowed him to rage, to argue, to attempt to reclaim the narrative, but I didn't engage emotionally. Every threat was met with calm, factual responses when necessary. I had the lease, the payments, the utilities, the documentation of his fake portfolio, the social media evidence of vacations, all meticulously cataloged. Every word he said could be countered with irrefutable proof. The power he once wielded through manipulation and charm was gone. The eviction was a turning point. The building manager confirmed all violations, and the lease termination was set. Leo was facing tangible consequences, loss of his apartment, a forced adjustment to reality, and the end of the cushioned lifestyle he had relied upon for years. No more free rent, no more excuses, no more delusions of grandeur funded by others. The notice was official and legally binding. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. And for the first time, Leo had to confront it. Over the next few days, my parents began to show subtle but significant shifts. Helen, who had been quick to defend him, now showed glimpses of understanding, even remorse. She started asking practical questions, acknowledging the consequences, and gradually taking responsibility for her role in enabling him. Mark, the historian and methodical thinker, began engaging with reality rather than narrative, discussing repayment plans, new responsibilities, and ways to ensure Leo could no longer manipulate or evade accountability. They weren't perfect, but the first seeds of responsibility were being planted, and it was gratifying to witness. Leo's adjustment to real-world consequences was messy but inevitable. He had to deal with eviction, learn to pay for his own bills, and confront the responsibilities he had long avoided. Each day presented small, unavoidable challenges, finding temporary accommodations, understanding what he owed, and grappling with the fact that his previous lifestyle was unsustainable. He resisted at first, of course, trying charm, excuses, and frustration, but the framework of accountability I had set in motion left no room for evasion. Slowly, the lesson began to sink in. Actions have consequences, and responsibility cannot be outsourced indefinitely. During this time, I maintained my normal routine at the hospital, balancing the chaos at home with the precision my work required. But I also monitored and managed the fallout from the family confrontation with the same meticulousness I applied to every critical task at work: calls to the property manager, emails confirming lease violations, and documentation of all interactions with Leo and my parents became part of the rhythm of the days. Each interaction is precise, calm, and methodical, leaving no ambiguity or room for manipulation. I was executing a plan that combined professional discipline with personal necessity, and the results were undeniable. One of the more challenging aspects was dealing with my mother's attempts to negotiate and intercede. She tried the familiar tactics of guilt and emotional persuasion, appealing to family loyalty and compassion. "Rosie, please, think of the family. Think of your brother. We just want to help him." I listened carefully, acknowledged her concerns, but my response was measured and unwavering. I explained, clearly and calmly, why continuing to support Leo's lifestyle would only perpetuate the pattern of deception and dependency. I set firm boundaries that left no room for misinterpretation. I would not resume payments. I would not excuse irresponsible behavior, and I would not allow the past to dictate the present. Mark also became more involved in enforcing practical accountability. He spoke with Leo about concrete steps, a repayment plan for the money owed, contributions to household expenses, and regular check-ins to ensure compliance. My father, who had long deferred to charm and narrative, finally began acting as an enforcer, ensuring that consequences were not only stated but applied. The shift was subtle but profound. Together, The parents and I began to reconstruct a framework of accountability that had been absent for years. Leo's response varied from disbelief to frustration, with occasional bursts of anger. But the combination of eviction, repayment obligations, and parental oversight left him with no alternative but to comply. The fantasy life he had maintained for years, buoyed by my labor and their indulgence, collapsed into a series of practical realities. He had to adapt or face continued legal and financial consequences. This was the first time he encountered consistent, enforceable accountability, and it was transformative in a very uncomfortable way. Gradually, the rhythm of our new dynamic took hold. I continued to perform my professional duties with focus and precision, while evenings and weekends were dedicated to monitoring the family fallout. Each phone call, each email, each check-in became part of the structure I had imposed. The tension that had dominated our household began to shift, replaced by a careful, deliberate process of realignment. Parents adjusted their expectations. Leo faced consequences, and I maintained boundaries that were firm but fair. Over time, I observed subtle changes. Leo's frantic calls diminished, replaced by more measured communication as he realized his old tactics no longer worked. He began to take on responsibilities he had long avoided, adjusting to the consequences that were unavoidable. My parents, too, adjusted, recognizing the patterns they had enabled and starting to take responsibility for creating a more accountable environment. The house was no longer a place of tension and enabling. It was a space where responsibilities were clarified and actions had measurable outcomes. Through this process, I maintained a careful balance between my professional life and the family matters. My work at the hospital demanded precision, focus, and dedication, and I continued to excel, applying the same methodical approach to managing medications and protocols as I did to overseeing the accountability measures at home. The consistency reinforced my authority and control, both in my personal life and in interactions with my parents and Leo. There was no chaos, no emotional overreaction, only clear, deliberate, and measured action. Boundaries remained a critical component. I enforced them consistently. No financial support without accountability, no excuses for irresponsible behavior, and no tolerance for attempts to manipulate or evade responsibility. Leo, for the first time in his adult life, had to accept that his actions had real consequences. My parents began to respect these boundaries, acknowledging the necessity of discipline and oversight. Over time, this led to incremental but meaningful shifts in behavior and attitude, setting the stage for long-term change. The culmination of these days was a subtle but profound change in our family dynamics. The tension remained, but it was tempered by clarity and fairness. Leo began to accept, reluctantly at first, the consequences of his choices. My parents, recognizing the necessity of intervention, began to act decisively and supportively in enforcing rules and boundaries. I, meanwhile, continued to balance empathy with precision, ensuring that accountability was consistent, fair, and non-negotiable. Through careful, methodical action, the household began to shift from a cycle of enabling and deception to one of responsibility and accountability. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't without friction, but the foundation for lasting change had been laid. The days following the confrontation were the first true test of our ability to adapt, enforce consequences, and acknowledge truth. And through it all, I maintained the calm, precise focus that had allowed me to see the full scope of deception and implement the necessary measures for accountability. After weeks of tension, confrontations, and meticulously enforced boundaries, a new rhythm began to emerge in our family. The chaos that had once dominated Sunday dinners, phone calls, and every interaction slowly gave way to a quieter, steadier pattern. Leo, for the first time in decades, had to face the reality of his actions. He started a real job, something concrete, with a paycheck and predictable responsibilities. It was jarring for him at first. He hated the early mornings, The fluorescent lights, taking orders, the accountability, but it was necessary. Slowly, he adjusted. The frantic calls, the manipulation attempts, and the empty threats faded as he began to learn the structure of adult responsibility. For the first time, he was accountable not only to himself, but to the people he had previously relied on to carry his life. Repayment became part of this new structure. The parents and I had negotiated a plan that was realistic yet firm, a tangible acknowledgement of his dependence over the past years. Leo agreed, grudgingly at first, to make monthly payments. It wasn't the full sum I had covered, but it was a start, a way to quantify the lessons he needed to internalize about responsibility and consequences. Watching him adjust to this system was strange, almost surreal. He had always floated on charm and minimal effort, and now every action, every payment, every decision required thought, accountability, and consistency. I could see the shift taking hold, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't immediate redemption, but it was a step toward a reality he had long evaded. My parents, too, changed in subtle ways. The rigid indulgence that had defined their treatment of Leo softened into a balanced approach, tempered by the lessons they had been forced to confront. They acknowledged their enabling behaviors and began to support the new boundaries I had put in place. Conversations with them moved from defensive justifications to collaborative discussions about expectations, responsibilities, and fairness. The family's narrative, which had long prioritized charm, fantasy, and perceived creativity over diligence and honesty, slowly realigned. What had once been chaos and indulgence transformed into structure and accountability, and while tension didn't vanish entirely, it was now built on clarity rather than fear or denial. For me, this period marked an incredible shift as well. I had spent decades managing expectations, covering gaps, and absorbing the consequences of others' irresponsibility. But now, for the first time, I was able to step back, breathe, and recognize the extent of my own achievements. My quiet condo, my demanding job at the hospital, my meticulous attention to detail and discipline. They were not boring or unremarkable. They were my fortress, the foundation upon which my life was built. And for the first time, that foundation felt entirely under my control. The burden I had carried, the silent responsibility, was no longer a trap, but a source of pride and security. I could move forward knowing that my diligence and integrity were not being exploited but respected. As Leo adjusted to his new job and repayment plan, I began to reclaim spaces in my life that had been overshadowed by his chaos. Simple routines became a source of joy rather than obligation, brewing my morning coffee without worry, walking home in the evenings with a sense of calm rather than dread, returning to hobbies or quiet moments without guilt. The tension that had always lingered, the faint anxiety of constant responsibility for others' behavior, began to dissipate. For the first time in years, I could exist in my own life fully, without compromise or manipulation, and it felt liberating. One of the most transformative experiences came in the form of a solo trip to Japan, a long-held dream that had always been deferred. I booked it not as an escape, but as a reward, a conscious celebration of independence and self-reliance. Walking through quiet temples, wandering bamboo forests, and exploring bustling markets, I experienced a profound sense of peace. The sensory richness of Japan, the sounds, smells, colors, was a contrast to the sterile precision of my hospital work and the tense calculations of family oversight. And yet, it was connected. The discipline, the attention to detail, the awareness of patterns, all the skills I had honed over decades enabled me to navigate this adventure with confidence and ease. I was alone, and yet not lonely. I was independent, and yet connected to a deeper sense of self and achievement. Each step through ancient streets or temple grounds felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been overshadowed by years of managing others' lives. The journey also provided perspective on the family dynamics I had navigated for so long. In the quiet of Japanese gardens, I reflected on the months of confrontation, analysis, and enforcement of boundaries. I understood the necessity of each step: the confrontation with the binder, the eviction procedures, the precise calculations of repayment, the firm communications to parents and Leo. It had all been a methodical, deliberate process, and now I could see the trajectory clearly. The chaos and manipulation that had once dominated my world had been replaced with clarity, structure, and a tangible sense of accomplishment. My victory was quiet, personal, and profoundly satisfying. Returning from Japan, I found that the family dynamic had stabilized. Leo continued with his job, adhering to the repayment schedule and slowly integrating responsibility into his daily routine. My parents, having witnessed the consequences firsthand, were no longer complicit enablers. They reinforced boundaries, held Leo accountable, and engaged with me as a collaborator rather than as someone to mediate or manipulate. Sunday dinners, once a minefield of judgment and tension, had become calmer, more balanced. Conversations centered on mutual respect, and while the old habits didn't disappear overnight, the framework for a functional, accountable family was firmly in place. The personal triumph was subtle, but profound. My life, once framed as ordinary, predictable, and perhaps dull, had emerged as the source of stability and integrity for those around me. The skills I had honed in my professional life, precision, foresight, attention to detail, translated directly into personal empowerment. I realized that the life I had built for myself, the routines, the discipline, and the careful attention to both work and personal boundaries was not only sufficient, but extraordinary in its own right. The contrast with the earlier chaos was stark. Where once there had been manipulation, deception, and dependence, there was now autonomy, clarity, and respect. Small moments reinforced this shift. Leo's first paycheck went to partial repayment. He struggled, stumbled, and adjusted, but he was learning the value of responsibility. My parents, once advocates for fantasy over reality, now engaged with both of us on terms defined by facts and accountability. Conversations were quieter, but deeper. They asked about my work, listened genuinely, and shared their own updates without slipping into old patterns of indulgence. The atmosphere was warmer, more respectful, and underpinned by an understanding that boundaries, responsibility, and truth mattered more than appearances or charm. I found myself reflecting often on the journey, appreciating not only the outcomes but the process. The confrontation, while difficult, had been necessary. The meticulous documentation, the careful planning, the deliberate enforcement of boundaries, all of it had culminated in a stable, respectful environment. The sense of triumph was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, personal, and profoundly satisfying that I had reclaimed control over my life, asserted accountability, and established a precedent for truth and responsibility that could not easily be undone. As I settled back into my routine, the lessons became tangible in daily life. I appreciated my morning coffee, the predictability of my commute, the rhythm of my hospital shifts. I engaged with my parents and even Leo with calm authority, maintaining boundaries without friction. Each interaction reinforced the new equilibrium, a balance of responsibility and respect that had been absent for decades. The binder, the documentation, and the methodical enforcement of consequences had been tools of empowerment, and they had achieved their purpose. The solo trip to Japan remained a pinnacle of this period of personal growth. I traveled through temples, markets, and bamboo forests with a sense of freedom and joy that contrasted sharply with the tension and responsibility of past months. The experience underscored the value of independence and the satisfaction of self-reliance. I was able to exist fully in my own life, appreciating both the ordinary and the extraordinary, and recognizing that my previous sacrifices and diligence had created a foundation for this freedom. Returning home, I noticed a quiet, profound shift in perspective. I no longer measured my worth against the chaos or perceived success of others. I recognized my achievements and valued the stability, responsibility, and integrity that defined my life. The family dynamic, once dominated by favoritism and indulgence, had been recalibrated. Leo faced consequences and learned accountability. My parents accepted responsibility and enforced boundaries, and I, at long last, experienced the peace, independence, and personal triumph that had been long overdue. In the weeks that followed, small indicators of lasting change became evident. Leo made his payments on time, adjusted to his new job, and began internalizing responsibility. My parents engaged with him in a structured, accountable way, reinforcing the lessons learned from the confrontation. Our interactions became measured, respectful, and consistent, reflecting a newfound equilibrium, and I, finally free from the burden of managing others' deception and irresponsibility, was able to focus on my work, my own life, and experiences that brought joy and fulfillment. The ultimate triumph, I realized, was not the eviction, the payments, or even the confrontation itself. It was the reclamation of my life and agency, the establishment of a structure where accountability and respect prevailed, and the ability to step back, breathe, and live in a world where my labor and integrity were acknowledged. The contrast with the prior chaos was stark, where once there was manipulation, debt, and enabling, there was now clarity, boundaries, and personal empowerment. The experience, while challenging, had illuminated the value of steadfastness, precision, and self-respect. In the end, the quiet victory was profound, transformative, and enduring. Rosie's story reminds us how vital it is to know our worth, set boundaries, and take responsibility, not just for others, but for ourselves. It's about finding balance, asserting control, and claiming the life we've built with effort and integrity. What would you do in a situation like hers? Have you ever faced a moment where boundaries and truth made all the difference? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories of resilience and personal triumph, stick around for more.